Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Suzanne McConnell. Suzanne holds a BA in Sociology from the University of Arkansas and an MFA in Fiction Writing from the Iowa Writers Workshop. Twice nominated for the Pushcart Prize, her stories, essays, and poems have appeared in such publications as the Huffington Post, Provincetown Arts, the Brooklyn Rail, the Waterstone Review, Green Mountains Review, The Fiddlehead, Personal Fiction Writing, Earth's Daughters, A Sense of Place, and Poets and Writers. She's been granted residencies at UCross Foundation, Dorland Mountains Arts Colony, and Villa Montalvo Center for the Arts. She taught writing and literature at Hunter College for 30 years, was the scholar facilitator for New Jersey's literature and medicine programs at the University of Medicine and Dentistry, and has been an editor and writing coach ever since. Since 2006, she has been fiction editor for the Bellevue Literary Review. Her stories have won first prize in the New Ohio Review's Fiction Contest, first prize in Prime Number Magazine's Flash Fiction Contest, and an excerpt from her novel, Fence of Earth, won second prize in So to Speak's Fiction Contest and was a finalist in the James Fellowship for Novel Progress. Suzanne's book about Kurt Vonnegut's advice on writing, Pity the Reader, on Writing with Style, is available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook. So welcome, Suzanne. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So perhaps you can start by just telling us, some of your thoughts on the pandemic and its impact.
Well, one of my thoughts is that the temptation is to kind of hold our breath and wait till it passes and pretend that things are going to return to normal. Everybody's talking about the fact it might not return to, there might be a new normal. But I think that maybe one of the thoughts I had was a way to get through it is to not pretend that we're getting through it, just to, this is life, this is what's happening now, how do I handle what's happening now, and to proceed in that way. So everybody has different ways. I mean, the New York Times is just replete with advice and possibilities and so on of how you can entertain yourself, protect yourself, negotiate things. There was a whole page of yoga positions last week. There's a whole page of recipes. Everybody's doing everything they can to try to entertain themselves, keep themselves busy and alive and well. So I was just writing down the things I've done in the last week, like what's getting me through, because I think everyone is going through periods of grief. I mean, this is a terrifying and horrifying experience. And if you're watching TV and you're watching people in the emergency rooms, it's incredible. The editor-in-chief of Bellevue Literary Review is a doctor, and she's over at Bellevue, and she's testing and being on the front lines, and feels very real to me. And also the outbreak that happened in Bergamo, Italy, where it first happened there. My husband had an exhibition at a museum there 2 years ago, and we spent a month in Bergamo. It's a small town. So that was the first thing that struck me, was suddenly Bergamo is in the international news because it's the epicenter. And so we wrote to the curator and the director there, and they said if we had known this was going to be like this 2 weeks ago, I mean, they just said, be careful, watch out, So I'm very aware of what an intense period. So we're all carrying this cloud of grief on the periphery and fear, and also we've got an administration that is just as frightening. So that's a lot to bear, and being inside. So I don't know. I'm sure everyone is saying this. Don't OD on any of it if you can help it. Do things to lift yourself up. So I watched Jackie Lewis's middle collegiate church sermon on Sunday at 11:30 or 11:45, which is
Yay.
just the most joyous. Her services are the most joyous, authentic services and ecumenical services
Yes,
I've ever
absolutely.
been to, and I love it because I grew up as a Baptist, and it was not very ecumenical and not very friendly, really, and hers is the opposite. And so I did that every night. I don't know if this is happening in New Jersey, but here in Manhattan, and it did start in Italy, people are cheering at 7 o'clock. And for us in New York, this is a very funny story. We have neighbors across the street from us. We look into their place across the street in Manhattan, and we've lived across the street from them for 30 years, I don't know.
Wow.
Long enough to watch their children grow up. And we actually met her once at a party, but we never became friends. It's like, the windows are open. We don't have shades. It's Manhattan. It's not a suburban thing. So every night we watch them fix dinner. We can see them. We can't see in enough to know exactly how the place looks, but we know that that's their kitchen and that they're sitting down. We can see sitting down dinner. And I suppose they see us. Same thing for breakfast. Okay. Suddenly they start cheering at 7 o'clock, opening their windows, and we're cheering every night. We're waving across the street to them, banging our pans. She's Swiss, and she has a Swiss cowbell that she hangs out the window, other people down the street, and it's a highlight.
That is great.
It's really a highlight, like you are connecting. And I can see in their faces that it's their son, and both the man and the woman lean out, and I can see in their faces that it's just as meaningful to them to be connecting with us in that way.
That is so cool. I'm really glad that it's happening that way. It's so meaningful to everyone.
So, and one of the things that's happened is that there are these National Guard guys staying in a hotel down the street. And one day, Gary and I, my husband and I, talked to them, and they were from all over the place and all over the country, and they were on a morgue detail, which meant they have to be the ones, I guess, who say, yes, this person is dead of a disease, or what, that just pronounce that. So when we're banging our pots and pans, some of the time those guys are coming back, getting out of their cars. So we are actually clapping for somebody. Sometimes it's just there's a delivery guy going by on a bike. So everyone's saying this, but talking to friends and family, but in a way for both my husband and I, the best thing is that we both have very absorbing work. And that work goes on. And that work goes on regardless of what's happening. And you focus and you concentrate and you continue, and
it's an important thing, for a lot of us to have right now.
Yes, yeah, it's really a blessing, yeah. And I think the other thing is, if you can do something to help, to contribute, that really makes a difference. I can't figure out a very clear way that I can do that, but I just launch onto my writing as the way that I'm doing that in a very indirect way.
Well, that's what I want to talk about a little bit. A lot of, the audience for these interviews are writers.
Oh.
And so I really wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit with you in terms of Exactly. Yes, I will definitely reference your book in the notes for this. But
I have a chapter I could read that's sort of
cool.
about this. It's a very short chapter.
That would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll read it. It's called Diligence.
Sounds timely.
Let's see, where is it? Yeah, okay. So some of these are quotes from Vonnegut. About 60% of the book are quotes of Vonnegut's.
Great.
Okay, so I'll say when I'm quoting from Vonnegut because otherwise it won't be clear.
Yeah, we can't see the quotes in there, can we?
Can't see the quotes, right? Okay, so here's a quote. It starts with a quote. As a writer, I share a problem, perhaps you could call it a tragedy, with most human beings, a tendency to lose contact with my own intelligence. It's almost as if there were a layer of fat upon the part of us that thinks, and it's the writer's job to hack through and discover what is inside. So often it's this belief, or some such belief, that keeps me going after a day when I've been at it for hours and I'm dissatisfied with what I've produced. But I do keep at it. And if I'm patient, a nice egg-shaped idea emerges, and I can tell my intelligence has gotten through. It's a slow process, though, an annoying one because you have to sit still so long. That's the end of the quote. Writing takes a kind of demented patience. That Vonnegut line stayed with me my whole career. Vonnegut's Iowa student Ronnie Sandroff says, I wrote very slowly and longed for the mythical automatic writing of Jack Kerouac, tumbling out gripping prose in a heated rush. But I learned to labor, and it made me an editor as well as a writer. So this book has little lines that divide. It's kind of in bits and pieces because I am quoting so much. So here's one of those little lines. This is me. Just because Vonnegut had talent and expertise didn't mean he wasn't plagued by daily doubt. Here's another quote from him. I keep suspecting I'm out of business and better become a rock star or buy a greenhouse or something. Right now, I don't feel particularly in business, but I know how to get into business, and that is by hacking around to see what is in me. It's a little like a Ouija board. I will try to get a clue to what my intelligence wants to talk about, and then I will try to talk about it more and more. End of quote. Ask any artist, this is me, anyone accomplishing anything of value. Patience, perseverance, and work, those humble virtues, rate at least as high as talent on the list of necessary equipment any day. I have more here, but I just want to have an aside that one of the things I wanted this book to do is I wanted people to be able to read advice about writing that they could translate into everything else. So this advice about patience and diligence, it's about everything.
That applies to absolutely everything.
It applies to everything. So here's a poem from Michelangelo. It's a translation of a poem by Michelangelo written in 1509.
Wow.
To Giovanni di Pistoia, when the author was painting the vault of the Sistine Chapel. It's translated by poet Gail Mazur. I've already grown a goiter from this torture, hunched up here like a cat in Lombardy or anywhere else where the stagnant water is poison. My stomach squashed under my chin, my beard's pointing at heaven, my brain's crushed in a casket, my breast twists like a harpy's, my brush above me all the time dribbles paint so my face makes a fine floor for droppings. My haunches are grinding into my guts. My poor ass strains to work as a counterweight. Every gesture I make is blind and aimless. He goes on and on and on. He ends with, my painting is dead. I am not in the right place. I am not a painter.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Okay.
I guess it kind of wore on him, didn't it?
Yes. Another little break, and this is my writing and ends the chapter. The small, stunning Abbey Library of St. Gall in Switzerland, a World Heritage Site, contains over 2,100 handwritten manuscripts, spanning well over 1,000 years, according to the visitor's brochure. The library itself is rococo and beautiful, and the collection is arranged superbly to display the history of print, papyrus, palimpsest, parchment, and the instruments and painstaking work of calligraphy. But what charmed me most were scribbled complaints on the margins and back pages of an enormous Latin grammar book, copied circa 850 by a laboring Irish monk. Alas, my hand! A blessing on the soul of Fergus. Amen. I am very cold. The ink is thin. The parchment is rough in the writing. And another manuscript bearing this scribe's complaint. I, Erbicht, have finished this book with the aid of God, not without physical strain. Who doesn't know how to write, doesn't think it's a hardship for three fingers right and the whole body labors. Here's Kurt Vonnegut's lament. My own means of making a living is essentially clerical and hence tedious and constipating. Intruders, no matter how ill-natured or stupid or dishonest, are as refreshing as the sudden breakthrough of sunbeams on a cloudy day. And this is my paragraph ending this little chapter. Never hurts to let off steam. Meanwhile, in spite of tedium, cramped backs, self-doubt, patiently and persistently, these laborers produced illuminated manuscripts, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and a singular body of writing, in Kurt Vonnegut's case, and bestowed them to us.
I'm so glad you read that chapter. That is, I mean, that's really something. And I've got to get this book because, you know, as you said, it's applicable to life. It's not just about writing, but I think it will be incredibly helpful to all of us writers.
Yeah. So I have a niece who has a little baby now, and she's just going crazy. I mean, people who are parenting, it's really like the Sistine. It's this kind of labor going on all around us, you know, maybe not for you and I, but for a lot of people.
You know, both of my daughters have got, you know, 2 small children each, and, you know, they and their husbands are trying to work from home and trying to take care of the kids. And so I hear what you're saying. I would have, I'm glad I'm not young.
Me too. Yeah, I am too, really. It's much easier. It's much easier to be older. Yeah.
So one of the things that, you know, we're talking about during this interview series is, you know, reflections on how God supported us in challenging times in the past and how we can draw upon that now. And you sent me this amazing article that you wrote about, you know, tragedy from your time in Iowa when you were younger and your reflection on that now. So you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. When you asked me that question, I found myself thinking, what's helped me in trying times is being put through so many trying times, I think.
Yep, a lot of experience.
Yeah. So that, what you're talking about is a piece that's in the Brooklyn Rail online right now. And it was a week, the first year I was at Iowa. It was spring, and traditionally in Iowa they have pig roasts.
This is when you were a student, right? You know, and
I was a student.
so I assume you were in your 20s or?
Yeah, I was 21, I don't know, 21, 22, something like that. I was young. And I had already been through some stuff just before that. Let me back up a minute. So just before I came to Iowa, my parents had moved from San Diego, where I grew up, to Arkansas. And it was in the 60s. And it was the most intense living experience I've had, is shifting from San Diego to Arkansas during the height of the civil rights movement.
Wow.
And it was a very sexist, racist place. But one of the things I discovered that remained valuable for me for the rest of my life is that if you're in situations that are so pressed like that and so divisive, heroes come to the fore. So the Southerners that I knew who were righteous people were amazing, because it took a lot of courage to do that and be that way. And I found myself making decisions that I didn't know I would have made if I had just led an ordinary, easy life. Suddenly I'm not in that situation. I'm in a very different situation. It presses you. And I started writing there. And it was the last semester of my senior year. I was majoring in sociology. I'd always been a really good writer, but I hadn't thought I could be a writer. And last semester of my senior year, I was just bursting with stuff to say. I'd worked in a nursing home, which the summer before, when I went back to San Diego, and suddenly I was around people dying. What's happening right now? And I would, and then I'm in the civil rights. I was just quite traumatized by things that happen in the larger world by the time I got to Iowa. Systems of segregation, systems of bad hospital, bad nursing care, and other things, even more. So when I got to Iowa, I was already in this kind of shocked state, because I was young and naive, and I was just shocked out of my naivete for a couple of years there. And then this week happened, which was a tragedy of a different kind. It was in my face. It was 3 students died in 1 week, all of whom I knew, and it centered around this place where I lived, Black's Gaslight Village, which was a kind of a crazy place full of different, I describe it in the piece.
College town.
Yeah, which I realized that was part of the revision. I realized I had to tell people what this place looked like,
College town.
Yeah. And so it was extremely traumatic to have 3 people that you knew who were your age die in 1 week. And it was during the Vietnam War. And it just was shocking. I couldn't finish my schoolwork. I walked around like a zombie afterwards for a while. I had to take incompletes. When you're young, I see this on the street. Yesterday we walked over and saw the Blue Angels. They flew over. There were quite a few people over there at the pier, and the people who are not wearing masks, the runners who are not wearing masks, are young. Old people are wearing masks because when you're young, you really don't get it. You do not understand that you're mortal. One of the things I think as you age and people that you know die, you sort of get used to it. Oh, you're mortal. But when you're young, it's out of sorts. And in our culture where we're not around death very much, it made me furious. It made me furious.
No, I can understand. I mean, and it's largely because of what you're saying. It's like you feel like when you're young, you're, somebody else. Happens to somebody old. It doesn't happen to me. It's irrelevant for me. It's easy to have that mindset when you're young.
Right.
I did too.
Of course. I think it goes with the territory. There's no way that you can't feel that way in a way,
So then after the article, when did you actually write the first article?
So the first article was written maybe 10 years after the experience of it. No, a little bit longer, like 14 years after the experience. It was written for the anniversary of the Writers' Workshop, and I kept trying to write something else. I was in Germany while I was writing it, and I kept trying to write something nice, And it wouldn't let go of me, because of all the things that I learned, and it was an incredible experience to be in Iowa, but that one, uh, that experience was the most impactful.
Well, I can imagine. I can't imagine anything being more impactful, practically. So, that's completely understandable.
Yeah.
But then you wrote a reflection on that article and that experience here recently.
Very recently. So what happened is I read it to my writing group, because when I wrote Pity the Reader, I put all kinds of stuff in there in the appendix, anything that had to do with Iowa, including that original piece. And my editor, rightly so, said, this doesn't belong here. It's terrific, but it's too dark and it doesn't fit this book. And of course it didn't fit the book. There were other things I had in there. I just threw everything in at the end, And then I thought, but there's something worthwhile. There's something worthwhile here that should be in the world, So I read it to my group, and the friend in my group who said, but what does it mean? She's a very valuable critic in that group, because she's always saying tough things like that, And then I ran into, then I went to a party at Seven Stories Press. My publisher had a Christmas party, and an editor from Brooklyn Rail was there. And I'd already published something in Brooklyn Rail previously. And so I told him, I said, I have this piece. I don't know if you want to look at it or not. So I sent him the original piece. He said, I told him, I think it needs some revision. It needs this. And he just wrote me back and said, yes, it needs revision. Send a revision. And so I worked on it again. And that was this year. So this is my whole adult life
But the article itself was just amazing. To hear that experience and that saga and how you wrote about it. But then the reflection that you wrote about it, here years later, was really impactful. So, I'm going to make sure that, there's a link to that it gets included in the notes for this interview. And I'm going to really encourage people to read it, because it's just, what a reflection.
Thank you.
So, Suzanne, what other kinds of resources, books, thoughts, do you have that can help people through right now?
Well, thoughts. Okay. The thought is what I was talking about a little earlier, that in my life, in hindsight, every truly difficult time has eventually led to something, I don't want to say, I guess I'll say meaningful, has either opened my heart or deepened my soul, or had me make choices, or led me to write something that led me somewhere else. And so, this is, I'm in my 70s. This is a lifetime of looking back. It doesn't happen when you're doing it. So right now, there's a lot of talk from people, and I think this is true, that this is leading us somewhere. Hopefully, and its best guise, it will lead us to value the moment, value our loved ones, do something about our healthcare system, get some people in positions of power that we can have a humanitarian society, because it's showing up right now. So that's one thing. And then in terms of resources, as a writer, a student of mine, when I was teaching at Hunter, told me about The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's a 12-step program for creativity, basically, based on AA. And I think I did that book And when I say did it, I mean, you have to do it. It's not a read book. It's a do her exercises, follow the book thing. I mean, the first time I read it, but then I did it about 4 times over, I don't know, I think whenever it first came out, the 90s or something. And it's a book about creativity, but I think it's very much about any kind of creativity. And also it's very spiritual because it's based on AA's idea of a higher spirit. And she talks about synchronicity a lot. When I got this book, when I was asked to do Pity the Reader, it was the clearest time in my life when I felt like Kurt and the spirit had just come down and hit me right here and said, this is for you.
Wow.
I really, it was very clear to me because I had been writing a novel and writing a novel and writing a novel for like 25 years. And I had gotten it into the shortest version of itself. It started out at 800 pages. Then it was 500 pages. It was the best shape, but my heart had been broken with this novel. It had once gone around with an agent for a year and a half. And I did not have the heart to market it. And I was just at that, I just realized that I can't do it. I can't do it again. And I started writing the story that won a first prize. And then I was asked to do this book. And there were all kinds of things that went together. Like I had proposed a panel at an AWP, Associated Writing Programs conference on Vonnegut. It had just been accepted. Then I get this phone call. And Dan Wakefield says, well, you're the perfect person. You've been a teacher. You knew him. And I thought, God, I am the perfect person. I mean, how many times do you feel like this is your place, you know? Uh-huh. So it was, and when you asking me these questions, I had this thought this morning it was almost like I was given this assignment so that I could tell myself all of the stuff that I tell everybody else in this book. Because now I'm going to send that novel out again.
Good. Excellent. Good for you.
So The Artist's Way is fantastic. There's a book called Writing as a Way of Healing by Louise DeSalvo, which is a wonderful book about writing memoir. And she has a very explicit method that she talks about in which you could heal if you're writing. I think there's a lot of stuff, a lot of resources from music and concerts that are on Zoom now that you can take advantage of if you will do it, if you have the time to do it and make the time to do it. So I think that, if you start opening your ears and listening for what's going to speak to you, it comes to you.
And everything's available somewhere on the internet these days, right? So, you just have to find it.
You have to find it.
So, Suzanne, I just want to say thank you for joining us. It was such a pleasure to learn more about you and your work. And I think the insights that you have over all that experience, over all that writing, is really helpful for our audience. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to think about these things.
All right. Thanks again, Suzanne.
Okay. Bye-bye.